I can see why photographers present the way that they do. You almost need to sort of take control.
Right.
And what you're left with is that you need to have, and this is something that I do have, the photographers and videographers that I work with, I generally have complete faith in.
Today, we are speaking with Scott Nash, author and illustrator, content producer, and founder of the illustration program at Maine College of Art. Nash's graphic work in the early days of MTV led to the development of Nickelodeon's brand identity, which led to logos for Comedy Central, Nick at Night, the Cartoon Network, and TV Land. He has reimagined characters like Jeff Brown's Flat Stanley and Dr. Seuss's Hooper Humperdinck, while illustrating more than 50 other children's books along the way. Nash attended the Swain School of Design, now part of the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth, and went on to attend the prestigious Cranbrook Academy of Art for graduate school. Nash and his wife, Nancy Gibson Nash, founded the Illustration Institute in 2016 to raise the appreciation and awareness of illustration in many forms. Our interview today is sponsored by Maine Home Design. Don't miss Nash's design theory in the upcoming March-April issue of Maine Home Design. Thank you for coming into the studio today, Scott Nash.
We moved here about 25 years ago, and one of the great attractions that brought us to Portland was that it felt tangible. The creative community here felt, or in Portland and in Biddeford, I think it's got a similar vibe.
Now, what do you mean
Feels.
by tangible?
It was easy to connect with people, and it still continues to be that way. I mean, the people that are here tend to want to make things. I find it easy to find talent, easy to find people that want to collaborate. I joke that I can, just walk around the streets of Portland, that old idea of managing by walking around. I sort of connect with any number of creatives in town just by walking around Portland. And there are people that I think, are willing to collaborate, want to see this become a creative hub, and really want to find a way to live here and create new things, new forms of media and such. The problem is that our city leaders need to start to look at how do we keep the creative class here. I think that's of primary importance.
That's always been a active conversation in the study of architecture and city planning.
Yeah.
And that, this idea of gentrification, the rich people get to enjoy it. And the idea that you have just an essentially an established class in a place,
right?
It stops growing and becoming an expression of life, and more so an expression of establishment.
I agree. And, people like Richard Florida have suggested things. I'm not a big fan of his philosophy because I think he misses on a key point. I mean, his suggestion is you start cultural institutions and an economy will build around that. I actually think you have to go deeper than that. You have to find ways to, find opportunities to teach, to collaborate, to connect, and also to embrace what used to be called the commercial side of things as well. Find ways to attract animation companies, production companies, that sort of thing to Portland and Biddeford. That's fundamentally important. I remember years ago, I had the opportunity, the good fortune actually, to work in London for a while on some production works in Soho. And that place was astonishing to me because you could literally, it was like a little creative, enclave. It was amazing. You could be working at a video production company, the moving picture company, walk across the street to meet with the composer who did animation, did scores for like animations like for the Snowman and other things. Aardman Animation was down the street. Everything was right there. You can make things happen. And I feel like we're losing a little bit of that in Portland, certainly. And I hate to hear that it's happening here as well. But we haven't lost it altogether. There still is I think a willingness and an interest in looking at new ways to sort of buoy and strengthen what we've been calling a creative economy.
Right. From the practice that I'm trained in, I'm trained as an architect.
Yeah.
The idea of just city codes affects that in a huge way. In that, if you allow people to have an income apartment, the low threshold of entry into having an income apartment,
yeah,
like just a space above a garage that's not that far from your house, and for it not to be considered like a duplex, but just to have that lets families say, oh, we're just going to put a small apartment there, it'll be low rent. So people that are either, trying to start a business and have no income, or like a single parent who don't have a lot of, resources, they end up rubbing shoulders with people who are, well off enough to own a house.
Yeah. And
there's a cross-pollination of both empathy and here's what's worked for us. Maybe it can work for you.
Yeah.
And also, you just have less money, but you're not a different person than me.
Right.
There's that just in that code working there.
Well,
Biddeford, unfortunately, doesn't have that. They say they've got this idea that if you have enough land to have a single home,
yeah,
you then have to get enough additional land to have another
right.
single home.
Right.
And it prevents it.
Well, I also sort of, I spent a lot of time trying to raise money for actually a production company in Portland. And I'm convinced, I was convinced, and I'm still convinced that we could be creating children's programming here. We have the right sort of cohort of creative talent, incredible writers. We have video producers. Mecca now has an animation department, which I think will start bearing fruit, soon, I hope. I think what we need to be better, or what I need to be better at doing, is articulating to the business community that this is real, like start talking in their language. I mean, I did a number of pitches about, creating, an animation production company here in Portland. And I was getting a lot of meetings with venture capitalists, but I started to realize it was mostly because they were entertained by what I was suggesting. They didn't fully understand the numbers or believe the numbers in some way. And so that's something that, I'm working on honing and trying to articulate to the investment community that, it's worth it. This could be a very viable economy within Southern Maine.
Now, what level, size, and kind of production company are you envisioning?
Well, that's been shelved for a little while because I've got some other projects that are going on I got a couple of projects going on, yeah. But actually, you can actually start a production company at a fairly modest size. You could be doing these days with technology. And I mentioned this to you earlier that I sort of love being in video production now again, because it's a lot less stressful and expensive than it used to be. I can afford to be a little bit more leisurely with what we're producing. So, we could establish, a company that was developing programming for kids, with like 20 employees,
Now, with the amount of content that is now consumed by the replacement generation at this point,
right,
people younger than me,
right.
The level, it's very interesting to me, this YouTube content creation, which I'm involved in myself as well. The draw of it is that it is high creativity, high authenticity, low production value. So
yeah,
the effect you get from it is like, wow, that's really creative.
Right.
I can see a stand here and a light there,
right,
and this and that.
Right.
The production value of it is low, but the creativity is very high. And it's very interesting how is that simply following on the coattails of like a reality show kind of aesthetic and feel, or is it just this Wild West frontier of like, anyone can do anything, and the people who can actually do it get the clicks and the views?
I actually have a bias here. I give me good writing over high production values any day, because you can do so much with the tools that are out there. So do it, get it out there. I am lamenting the fact that there isn't high quality, animation and such. And I think it's an opportunity. It's somewhere down the road, people are going to start craving sort of high-end animation. These things tend to happen in cycles. I worked with MTV and Viacom for years. And, they went from, developing sort of very high-end animated shows, to creating shows that were literally tongue depressors with eyes on them. There was this show called... it was called Stick or Stickly or something like that. And they were actually experimenting with, creating shows with very low production value and focusing. South Park is a great example, or Science Court and Dr. Katz, Professional Therapist, all of which is done in a fascinating and innovative way of animating, in that they're not doing any pre-sketches, they're just drawing straight on. I mean, they're utilizing the digital technology in a way that is truly innovative, and I don't think they would have come up with that particular design if it weren't for the tools that are now available to us. So, I'm anticipating there will be a cycle where you're going to want to see full range, full body motion and fully developed character animation. These things do happen in a cycle. So at least that's been my observation. Yeah.
I never really considered that. I just remember watching fur moved by the wind in animation increase tenfold over my lifetime. And that's the thing. Every time I see it, I'm like, wow, the animation is just so far.
Every time I see it, it takes me out of the movie, actually, because I'm suddenly geeking out on what they're doing technically, which is fantastic.
So how hard is that for someone like you to be able to absorb story because I can't absorb any imagery without breaking it down, because that's what I'm an image producer, and everything I look at, I don't really get, especially if it's my work, I don't get a chance to. I do get to feel it, but I have a hard time being immersed in a presentation of anything that's visual because I'm critiquing it constantly. Do you struggle with that at all, or have you figured out?
Well, I not to repeat what I said earlier, but I tend to focus on the writing. Does it make me laugh? And if I am being taken out of the movie because of the movement of the fur, there's probably something wrong with the movie as well. It's not just my geeking out on it. But there is that aspect to it. And so there have been films that I'll go back and see for a second time because, I got lost in the technical aspects of it. Ultimately, that's not where I personally want to go. I'd rather go towards, developing narratives that are compelling and funny. That's what I'm all about,
So I'm really interested to speak with you around, see if I can form this correctly, but the idea of what creativity really is at a fundamental level that uses such basic words that they're difficult to really understand or explain the words because they're so simple as a means of understanding creativity.
Yeah.
And then what is it about childhood and creativity that work together so well? And why do we so often have a hard time finding that present in older adults? Or basically anyone past 30.
Yeah, I have theories on that. I don't know that I have the answer, but I do believe that there are different ways of approaching creativity. I mean, one idea that interests me is that there are what I would call convergent illustrators and artists that focus on one thing. They focus on craft. They're very focused on developing mastery in a certain area. The other type of artist that they also like to celebrate, also happens to be the type of artist that I am, is a divergent artist. An artist that's
differentiate between a creative and an artist before we go too far as well.
Yeah, I shouldn't have said artist. Because I'm what I'm more interested in is the creative. I'm more interested in the creative. I'm interested in somebody whose vocation is to create new things. To create. As far as artistry, that's a whole nother subject that I don't I don't think we can get into later, but I'd like to focus for now on sort of, actually the vocational side of things. Vocation gets a bad rap. Vocation means your conviction, your interest, your specific interest. It doesn't mean it's sort of been relegated to sort of technical illustration. Technical education.
Okay.
And what I try to do when I'm working with students or working with creatives is to determine, what sort of creative they are. Are they a master, a craftsman, that sort of thing, or are they more divergent and maybe less sort of craft oriented, but coming up with lots of ideas? I think I would argue that you need both in any sort of artistic or creative endeavor. You need both of those sort of stimulus, or both of those sorts of perspectives, rather.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually trying for 4 days now. I've been filming and refilming, and now trying to because I thought I could just spitball it and go into a video on how and why the working as a creative is so incredibly draining, and why it requires such a detachment from the creative process with the risk of pleasing others at the same time. So as I work as a creative in what I do professionally, people paying me to take photos of their beautifully designed space.
Right.
The first thing I find is that I've got to subjectively immerse myself into the infinite possibilities of the infinite ways that I could portray this space. Mm-hmm. So just from the get-go, you're faced with the infinite, and you have to start to have an approach that you refine and rely on over time. Like, you get to where you feel it work, even through the inconsistencies, but yet the consistencies of these type of spaces that you're working with. Right. So you use your subjective experience to immerse yourself in that, go through all these choices of composition, lighting, styling, all of it. And then you feel your way through where you want to be and how this wants to be in that. And there's no right or wrong answer at any point. There's just people's opinion, both in the creation and judgment of that work. Mm-hmm. It's all emotional and subjective, but you have to use your intellect to interact with that experience to create a final product that you can hand over.
Right.
And that comes at high risk to everything that you've worked to create up to that point, because as a sole proprietor, if you mess up, you lose your reputation of being able to be creative. And if you fall back on your process of creativity too often, you stagnate and become irrelevant. Mm-hmm. So it's this high wire act of constantly maintaining a business, maintaining income, maintaining creativity, staying relevant, staying ahead of the curve. Like, all of that is just constantly pulling from you.
Yeah.
And to balance that all out, and to understand, if you do it too much at that high of stakes, where you understand the loss if you mess up in a royal way, you burn out, and then you're useless. So
I have to say, I'm an art director as well, and I've worked with a lot of videographers and with a lot of photographers. I have so much regard for what you all do. There's a part of me that can't quite comprehend what you do, because what you're doing is coming to having a very sort of quick dialogue with the clients about what the objectives are. There's a performative aspect to it that is absolutely exhausting.
Yeah.
Because you're needing to sell this right away. You're needing, or you're not sell, but you're needing to convey,
produce, finalize.
Well, your philosophy. You need to put together a philosophy, and sometimes you're just walking into a space and saying, "Here's what I think we should do."
Right.
What you do is done in a much more condensed fashion than what I do as an art director or an illustrator. I have long, luxurious conversations with my clients. Right. We bat things back and forth. I'm known for, if somebody comes to me with an idea with an assignment to do a logo, my first question is, why do you need a logo? And then that enters into a whole discussion, which I find to be a very important part of the creative process, is to build a philosophy, and not and I'm not winning. I'm not trying to win a particular sort of point of view. I'm genuinely looking to have a discussion with the client and determine where are we,
Right.
where, how it's not even finding common ground or compromise. It's coming actually to a greater place by giving the creative process more time.
Right.
And, I can see why, photographers have a reputation for, it's my way or the highway. There are those photographers that come in, you're in my house, I'm going to make this happen.
Right.
But I know with all of that bravado, and I've worked with some pretty big egos, that it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And so I'm afraid I don't have any particular, sense of how you do it, except to say I'm sort of in awe of what videographers do, what photographers do, because you're on pressure. You're being pressured. People are hyper aware of where the budget is. There's all of these factors that really shouldn't be coming into play in the creative process. So the way I do it is that I do a discovery phase. I do a lot of discussions with my clients, and my clients include everything from somebody who needs graphic design to, if we're building a building, we're going to have long discussions. I can see why photographers present the way that they do. You almost need to sort of take control.
Right.
And what you're left with is that you need to have, and this is something that I do have, the illustrator, the photographers and videographers that I work with, I generally have complete faith in.
Right.
And I don't mess with them too much. I'm not an art director that's going to hire someone like you and then stand over your shoulder and say, do this, do that,
Yeah.
I made a reference to this earlier when we were talking on the phone. I was saying, I like being an art director again. I like doing video again, because the pressures on me with especially big budget as an art director with big budget clients was palpable. It was always there. You had to get the right shot, and it doesn't bring out the best in my creative mind. It's sort of, I think it's the lizard mind that kicks in when I'm dealing in those situations. I'm not as thoughtful as I should be. And what I enjoy about video production now, we're doing a series through the Illustration Institute called Drawing is Thinking, where I can bring in a subject who, it could be a mathematician, it could be a ceramic artist, any number of sort of creative people who talk about drawing as a cognitive process, and they draw for us. And I can spend, suddenly, instead of having to get the footage in the can in a half an hour or so, I can give 3 hours. And we have. We've given 2 or 3 hours to a subject,
Right.
and then we're editing from that. And that to me is delightful. And that's what the new technology actually provides.
Yeah, and the cost to do that today is low.
Yeah, and you and I are just sitting here talking, like we're having coffee or something, and it's pretty, it's very casual. I like the casual nature of where we are as a creative culture. There's aspects of it where that is quite casual, and you and I could also say that it's something where we see lowered production value, but the casual quality, I think, will lead to more creativity and new ways of looking at film and video and media.
See, the reason I do this podcast, there's several reasons, but primarily it was because I hate going to functions, and I hate the part of meeting someone before you're actually talking about something of worth to talk about.
Right.
So like the time from meeting you in the parking lot to actually sitting down here is the most uncomfortable time for me. And now that we're talking about what you do and what you're interested in, what I'm interested in because of what I know you're, totally good.
Comfort kicks
But the other way,
pretty quickly.
Yeah. The other way, I'm just like, all right, what do I say now? I got to think of something, and it's just not, but this ability to, interact with people in this manner, one-on-one, talking about things that we actually care about.
Yeah.
And to be able to do that in a casual manner, for one, it puts me in front of, potential clients, all the architects I talk to and everything else. So it's good for my own marketing. but it's also good for me creatively to be able to bounce ideas off of people who've been doing creative things for a while, pick their brain and everything else. But then we can do this with hardly any cost to me or to you, really, other than our time, you know, and we can casually, you know, capture it with my microphone off. And, and it's not that big a deal. Where the value between this is that we have, you know, hopefully a decent amount of quality in our audio, and our conversation is interesting, and that's about it. And,
I agree.
And that in this more developed society, you're able to get stuff like that at lower cost and distribute it more widely. Mm-hmm. And there's something that gives back to the overall that is very valuable in the highly complex society that we now live, that only comes from that. So that's really interesting to me.
But what's interesting is the casual nature of this thing gives us more depth as well. That's what's we've done I think 10 of the Drawing is Thinking series, and we're going to be working on more. But when you're talking with an artist who's drawing and talking at the same time, they will start their discussion or their drawing will start prompting other ideas, and they get more comfortable with the whole process. They become very emotional sometimes. That's also really interesting to me when somebody starts to, get winsome about some aspect of what they do. And they sometimes will share, information that we ultimately edit out because, we're cognizant of their professional reputation as well. But the comfort level, because we can set up in a space like this, sitting at a table with a dog down here, which is great, I think will forever change the way that we look at this type of media, the documentary style, because we're all able to do this. It was all done, Errol Morris did it through like trickery, right? A camera that's over his, with all the sort of mirrors and such. But you and I are just sitting here chatting away, and it becomes more comfortable as we start to chat, as we continue to chat.
Is the more casual nature a response to the security that we have, both financially, physically, socially, whereas being in a more the desire to be more formal, where is that more present, and why is it disappearing in our current culture? I'm happy it's disappearing. I don't own ties, and that was really that was a driving force in my youth to say, I need to do something someday where I do not own ties or have to wear them.
I believe that what makes this really work is a combination of people with experience, such as myself, being willing to go casual. I think that's important, and I think most of us do want to go that way. But then also connecting with a younger cohort of artists that I think are even more comfortable, or even more or willing to experiment and play. Right. TikTok is horrid and fantastic at the same time. Wow. It's jarring. There's really bad stuff on TikTok. There's some amazing stuff on TikTok.
So here, let me know what you think of this. The thing I hate about TikTok is that it's so incredibly addictive. Yeah. In that it's only like a few second commitment on each one. Right. And there's never an ending. You always know the next one is low commitment. Mm-hmm. And it makes you that much more likely to, it was all right, I'll swipe again, and I'll swipe again. Yeah. And anytime I open up the Instagram where they transfer over the TikTok, and stuff, and you can go through it, or on YouTube, anytime I get into that, I've lost 15 to 30 minutes. Yeah. And so I'll get into them, and I'm consciously telling myself, eject, get out. And I just keep going. And
well, let me start this with an anecdote, if you don't mind. When I started when I became a partner in our design firm in Boston, I wasn't completely satisfied with the clientele that we were, or the client options that we had in Boston. They were a little bit more conservative than I was interested in. So we brazenly went down and started knocking on doors of companies that are based in New York City. And the doors that opened to us was the cable industry. And the reason the doors opened to us is because no one was taking it seriously. Nobody in the early days, it was sort of seen as being tawdry. It wasn't, I'm talking about like the mid 80s, and nobody was taking it seriously. And what that did, the fact that people weren't taking it seriously, I don't mean nobody, but most people were not taking it seriously, especially men. Male executives from entertainment did not see this as being a career path or opportunity or growth.
Wow.
So as a result, women became executives in the cable industry, which was a big change. And I have to say a welcome change from the executives that I was working with prior to that. And rogues like me and other people that had zero background in video somehow were able to enter in and start mouthing off about what we disliked about conventional television. And so I'm not a Pollyanna when I say these sort of things. I do think that I'm always wondering, where is this going? I'm looking at something like, NFTs or at TikTok and thinking, where is this going to lead? And because we have a tendency to sort of categorize these things, it is following into the casual aesthetic, definitely.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that you're starting to see on TikTok, if you dig into like baking streams, that sort of thing, there's some artfulness to that stuff. There's some interesting stuff. It's a whole different vibe there. So I think that we're seeing it in its infancy, and I think that providing the populace with tools that are fairly powerful. I mean, they're rudimentary, but they can actually build things around them. Mm-hmm. I tend to think that we're going to see something interesting come of that. So,
yeah, it's such like we had Vine first, and it went away.
Yeah,
and now TikTok is just roaring back, and it's incredibly, same thing, authentic and highly creative, low production value.
Vine was insular, right? Whereas, it seemed to be people sharing that had a pre-established interest in video. That seemed like there was less inventiveness to it. Whereas TikTok is overtly popular and egalitarian and jarring. I mean, I agree with you aesthetically. The vast majority of what I'm seeing on TikTok is jarring and upsetting to me, but then every so often there's some glimmers, and it'll be interesting to see. I think we can bet on it evolving into something that's more interesting.
Now, what do you see as the connection between childhood and creativity? Why do they seem to be good friends? And why do you think as an individual ages, you become less of a good friend with creativity?
It's because I don't want to sound glib with this, but because you move from more of an acceptance of informal education to formal education. You're trying things out as you're a kid. Hopefully, This is still the case, where you're becoming passionate or excited by any number of things throughout your life. I'm sure you've had this experience where you're like, completely into, go-karts or skateboards or something like that. And all of those are in some ways sort of creative endeavors, or younger people tend to be welcoming to, I hope this is still the case, to informal education, experiential education.
Right.
And as we get older, we start to embrace formal education, which I think is unfortunate. I think continuing to be interested in sort of informal learning is vitally important. Finding opportunities to learn outside of the structure of, say, the university system or degree granting institutions. I'm not against those, but I think you enhance that with experiences that are less formal and more sort of culture convivial, basically connected.
I have a theory on that is not exactly the same.
Okay.
I'd say I don't agree with you, nor do I ever really fully understand what you've said. That happens to me a lot, amazingly, with lots of people. But yeah, I think there's a natural trajectory from being born and having infinite possibilities to at the end having no possibilities. And there's just a simple transition over time of that. But since we possess consciousness, we can know that and fight it to a degree.
Yeah.
And there's a saying, if you're not liberal when you're young, you're heartless, and if you're not conservative when you're older, you're brainless.
Yeah.
I think that's true in a general observation of humans, but I don't think it's true. And what I mean by that is, when you're young, as you're saying, you're open to all the possibilities because you're looking to, what am I going to be? What value am I going to be? How am I going to sustain myself? How am I going to contribute? So you have to be open to all the possibilities. But as soon as you find like that possibility and you bring it in, you're like, I could do that. I'm interested in that. And then you start to build your life around that. You start to get some consistency, and that it starts to just sound like more of a conservative approach with consistency. It's like even in our language, it goes that direction. And as you narrow your possibilities down to what you more actually are, over time, you turn from being liberally open to what's possible to being a more conservative protector of what you've created. And it's almost a thing that turns and eats you in some ways.
Yeah.
And that's where I have this conflict of working as a creative to understand, how do I maintain this high level of creativity while maintaining my consistency and value to my clients, but still continually grow this creativity. Right. And I'm experiencing that because my youngest son has really gotten into skateboarding. I used to skate a lot when I was a kid.
Right.
As I started to hit concrete in my 20s, I shied away from it because it's like I was looking at all the possibilities and you started to run into the realities of life.
Right.
But I've gotten back into it with him, and it's just amazing to feel this reawakening of a body intelligence of just movement and
you still
what's
have
possible.
It. Yeah.
It's amazing. Like once you warm up, all of a sudden you're functioning again off of what your body stored as memory.
Right.
And it's my wife's a physical therapist, and she was explaining it to me, and it's kind of mind blowing to realize what you're doing. But there's that idea of, we don't have to go from completely feeling experience oriented to fully articulate and only functioning with a tie on.
Yeah.
Because we were born completely emotionally present. And I think that's something why there's this magic in childhood, because you're only able to experience, you're not able to articulate, really. That goes.
We are actually, I agree completely with what you just said, actually. So the idea of, that anecdote about liberal as a kid, conservative as you get older, part of that, and this is something that I've observed as a children's book illustrator who does many school visits, you can see and you hear anecdotally how, when you ask, how many of you like to draw,
They'll all raise their hand, usually.
In kindergarten.
Oh, really?
And then in second grade, it's a little, there's fewer and fewer. And what happens as part of the, the valuable, the valuable process of being, in a curriculum, is that you start to determine what you're good or bad at, and you start to categorize yourself that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that seems to be happening.
You deepen pathways in your mind.
Yeah. It's like, this is what I'm good at. And that sometimes, you're suddenly on a path, a trajectory that takes you into your mid 40s, because what you've determined at that stage is what you've become. There's a famous, I can't remember who actually coined this phrase, which was show me the kid at 7 and I'll show you the adult. That I find that statement a little horrifying, because the idea that you're already sort of set when you're 7 years old is somewhat troubling to me. I mean, it's beautiful and it's easy to sort of accept it on some level, but in fact, I think it's important to be looking at new things throughout your life. And I think that's what happens sometimes as we get older. In the way it manifests itself in my life is that when I'm developing something creatively, I'm genuinely not trying to win a position. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to play and have a conversation. And I think that those are important aspects to what I do as a creative person.
Right. The idea of win brings with it the concept of competition.
Yeah.
And it's not a competition. It's you have a problem. You don't know how to solve it. Right. I can help you by immersing myself in the possibilities of what could solve your problem. And because I'm of a certain nature of creative potential that I have, I am able to immerse myself in your problem and come out with a more concrete utility thing for you to serve your needs that you can't produce, not you.
But you're because you're viewing this in a maybe a more objective way, right?
Right.
And I can't, like when we established Big Blue Dot and Corey McPherson Nash, I forbade not in a big way, but I said I'd rather not use the term expert. I don't want to refer to ourselves as experts because that doesn't really do justice to the design process. The design process is an inquiry. Mm-hmm. We're finding out information, we're learning, and we're finding new opportunities by having conversations.
Now, for you, why the connection to so much media and content around childhood years?
It's circumstance, I guess. I got to work with Nickelodeon early on and in their development, and they struck me as being taking a new creative, not pedantic, non-pedantic, sort of non-preachy sort of view on kids. And it got me very excited. It got me, and probably the reason it excited me was that it connected me with my childhood, where there was less pedantic kids media out there. It was a world filled with rogues, like the names of which you probably don't know, people like Soupy Sales and some of these, or even Shel Silverstein, right? He was a rogue, basically. And suddenly, Nickelodeon, and we were part of the conversation in shaping their brand attributes, their philosophy, which I prefer to say philosophy, which was, give this over to the kids. Let's have conversations with the kids. Let's find new forms and new ways of connecting with kids. And that inspired me to start a company called Big Blue Dot, which focused on kids media. Which was hugely satisfying to me because it was sort of a narrow focus, but a broad mandate.
Right.
And it opened up for me a world where I was suddenly not viewed just as a graphic designer. Our studio wasn't viewed as a graphic design studio, but a bunch of creative thinkers, basically. And we were doing everything from, standard graphic design, television graphics, animated treatments for shows, to product design. And I didn't expect that turn necessarily, but because I was willing to step into this and think about, well, what would happen if there's also an opportunistic side of this, is that there are very few design firms that focus on kids media. And there was actually one or two others that were actually doing this. And so there was an opportunity there, but it's also incredibly creatively satisfying. It was, I used this term earlier, it became my vocation. That became, that is still a part of my life. A very important part of my life is thinking about kids media, how it will change, where it's going wrong, how it tends to swing from one trend to another and leave, it'll swing towards girls, and their needs, and the boys get forgotten, and then it swings back to boys. You see a lot of those sort of pendulum swings that are that are, unfortunately, they continue to happen. There's not a balanced sort of approach, but I find kids media incredibly fascinating. I haven't gotten the least bit tired of working in that realm, and it's a delightful world. Children's book publishers feel like benefactors to me. I can go to them with an idea for, I want to do a book on, pirate birds, and they'll say, oh, that idea has merit. There aren't many places where you can go where you'll get that sort of support for, what seems on some level is an outlandish idea.
Right.
So,
right. But if it's for kids, like, they're open to the possibility of anything. So the ability to inspire in that mind state is open.
Yeah.
It's open for business.
Yeah.
And that there's a really interesting thing about childhood for me that's hard to explain, how I've come to this theory, thought process, understanding. I lost my faith in my late 30s, which for me has been the best thing and hardest thing I've gone through. It's forced me to, it's a bit of a midlife crisis thing, but it's forced me to reevaluate everything as deep as I can go. Right. And I ran into this weird understanding that started with this quote from Theodore Roosevelt, where comparison is a thief of joy.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's such a weird relationship. Yeah. So, like, okay, everyone understands that when they hear it, because living up to someone's expectations, we all know that to be unpleasant. Why is it unpleasant? Well, you're comparing what you're able to achieve against someone else's expectations or whatever else. That's not you. You're not living what the truth is that you see. You're comparing it to something outside of yourself and trying to live up to something. Not fun. Now, was your childhood everything you dreamed it would be?
I was a free range kid. I mean, no surprise there. And yes, it was.
But it's a trick question.
Yeah,
you didn't get to dream about your childhood.
That's true.
So what's that mean? That means somewhere in your childhood, you did start to live against a preconceived expectation that you came up with.
Right.
And I'll bet you when you started to do that, that's when you started to lose the magic of childhood. And I'll bet you it happens around a culturally accepted time where a lot of cultures start to say you're a man now, around 13. That you start to face the world understanding that there's expectations more than simply being present, emotionally present, and fully present in the experience of the magic of life. And all of a sudden you're living against your own preconceived ideas.
You can come back, though. I mean, you can revisit that, like you are with skateboarding, which is kudos to you. I mean, well, I mean, I'll, in losing your faith or whatever, again, fairly middle class household. My parents we were not wanting for things like books, but my parents were really into sort of encyclopedic collections, and I loved that stuff. I would sort of dig through, Time Life books, all sorts of things. And at that time in my life too, we also had Sears used to create these big catalogs around Christmas time called the Wish Book. And we would go through the Wish Book, and it was known that we could go and check and circle things that were connected to our perceived vocations at that time, right? I remember writing to my mother, I want a biology set because I'm going to be a doctor, But in and amongst our encyclopedic books, we had The World's Great Religions it was published by Time Life. And at a young age, I thought, okay, Wish Book, The World's Great Religions, it's a catalog. I'm supposed to choose, right? And so I chose based on, going through this book and poring over mostly the images, I have to admit, that I was embracing Hinduism. Because they had by far
they've got great cartoons,
the coolest.
Yeah.
And but then beyond that, I mean, the stories that are connected with each of those, the gods, Ganesha and
there's some great apocalyptic imagery on the evangelical side, I will say. But
there
it's a little
scary. is. We didn't get much of that because we were Northern Protestants, so we didn't have to confess. We would confess in Mass. We would all stand up and say, "We sinned," and then sit down.
Right.
That's the way it was. So it's sort of Christianity light. But what's interesting is that I find myself looking at the polytheism in a serious way now, not as a belief system, but as a philosophical system.
Sure.
The idea that storytelling, using demigods or fallible gods, gods that did not behave well,
right,
is a really intriguing idea. And I think far more interesting, at least to me at this point, than some of the Christian stories, which, by the way, I also loved as a kid. The the Golden Bible. That was our primary Bible as kids. But it's funny how I do find myself sort of revisiting, ideas that were kindled when I was a kid, and think, polytheism's quite interesting to me. It allows discussion.
I think you can feel more when you're a kid, but you can articulate more when you're an adult.
Yeah.
And it's hard to feel again sometimes. And I hate that, but I can get there sometimes. And it's behind a wall of, failure and disappointment and shame and everything else that you build up for. You hold those things because you don't understand.
Yeah.
And if you can understand and articulate the emotional experience, you can remove that part of the wall again.
Right.
And you can access those emotions again.
Yeah.
And being able to do that, it's so weird. It's brought me back to this place of like being present again. And I feel more like a kid, but way more intelligent.
Yeah.
And it's the ability
and that's
to
what
understand.
you love. That's where you find love now, like skateboarding with your kid.
Oh, there's nothing better than
that.
Spending time with my kids.
Yeah.
It just like, it you realize that, children are essentially just a copy of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And what you hope is that they're a better copy than what you were.
Yeah.
There's this place that I've come to, which you're kind of referencing, that I think is very interesting, like with this dismantling, whatever, of what I held as certain before into more realization of human storytelling and potentially parts of it being true,
right? Maybe
not factual, but true. I've boiled down to this thing that I can't go past any deeper, and it's just truth and love.
Yeah.
It's not God and Satan. It's not sin. It's truth and love. And they're a two-part thing that have to be interacting. If they are not interacting, there is not life. And it's only in that truth and love where when you're born, you're completely a manifestation of love. You're only emotionally present. Mm-hmm. And it's that process of going from love combining with truth, the articulation of knowledge over time, that your aim is to get to where those two things work together completely.
I agree. Truth is tricky business for me. It's a slightly tricky business. But what I tend towards is my mantra is respect and reciprocity. Those are major sort of driving sort of forces for me, is to respect, to try to respect or see something, or be see something in a new way, or be skeptical of. I like being skeptical of my reaction of disgust towards something, because it doesn't get me anywhere.
Disgust is a fear of being contaminated.
Yeah. But we can feel contaminated by people whose political views we don't share.
Right.
That's what we're feeling disgusted by. I mean, and a lot of the schisms that we're seeing now are people that are, disgusted on one side by the values of the other side. And it's problematic. It's fundamentally problematic. And reciprocity is, finding ways to include, and to be inclusive, connected, and they sort of are tied together, not going into it necessarily with a point of view that you must win over that.
Right.
This
now,
the discussion
how do you express respect? What does that mean to you? Because when I express respect, that means I am going to engage with, question, challenge, and be open to an explanation.
It's difficult. It's very difficult. E.O. Wilson sort of created a little mnemonic for me, which is that it used to be when you were having a debate, you would actually say in response, if you disagree with somebody, you would say, in all due respect. You would actually state that. Now, that's a little bit much in modern parlance. You can't say, in all due respect, it sounds arcane. But you can in your head. You can think, I need to start at a place of respect. You need to, or you can't always do it. I'm not infallible in that regard. Disgust is a powerful force as well.
Yep.
And I am prone to vitriol as well. But attempting to be respectful, I think, is of primary importance to me as a person, but also as an artist.
So you'd easily respect anything that you agreed with, I would imagine.
It's more complicated than that.
Right, but when is respect needed, and how do you show it?
Let's see. I'm going to go back to sort of an art direction sort of answer here. Had a lot of creative people coming to me throughout my professional career, and showing me their portfolios. They would come in and I would spend time with their portfolios. I would never say to somebody that their work was subpar. I wouldn't offer criticism. I wouldn't do it. Because I found that as often as not throughout my professional career, contextually, you could find yourself hiring that person whose work you didn't particularly care for. Mm-hmm. That in a specific context, it is the absolute right thing.
Right.
And that's something that I try to keep in mind. I don't know if this answers your question exactly, but that's the sort of respect I will give, say, an artist. Mm-hmm. I give you the respect because you're, the things I might give criticisms to is a lack of professionalism, in the character of the artist themselves. But if they're dedicated and they're making things and they're showing that they're that they're committed to creating, then they've sort of earned my respect.
So they're on the path. They're trying, and
right.
they're somewhere in grade school to high school to college. They're somewhere on the path. They're trying. Yeah. So
a few years ago, Bloomberg magazine, I don't know if you were aware of this, I don't know how the creative directors sold this on Bloomberg, is that Bloomberg was perceived as being a very stodgy magazine. It was not, it was pretty conservative. And they were somehow convinced by their art directors to embrace ugly as an aesthetic and hire the worst illustrators you could imagine.
Did the illustrators know they were being hired? Because
I don't know that, but they would use type fonts that are reviled, like the one
Papyrus
or Comic Sans. They actually did a cover famously of Tim Cook with of Apple with his name written out in Comic Sans, and I have to say that contextually, that was brilliant. It was an absolutely brilliant solution, and one that wasn't as clear cut. Like if you took all of those images out of context, you could almost categorically say that these are ugly. But when they're in a context and when they're done intentionally to embrace ugliness, it becomes genius. So,
Did you ever get to speak to anyone behind the pitch idea?
No,
or
I
anything
feel
else?
terribly that I haven't taken the time to do that. It was, if you ever have a chance to look at, it was in the late 90s that they did that. Actually, no, it was early 2000s. Yeah.
And
So,
you know that their approach was, let's make this ugly.
right.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeez. How did you become privy to even that information?
Because you're seeing Bloomberg magazine, you're like, what is going on? I think they were looking to connect with millennials or something. They're just it may have been a stunt,
Yeah.
but it was a brilliant stunt.
Well, I remember the confusion that I would experience just with the recent, and I mean like 10, 12 years ago, introduction of the hipster aesthetic that at the outset was an embrace of ugly.
Yeah.
These, and it was just like being out of shape and slightly having a belly was a thing.
Yeah.
And it was like just fully embraced. And it was just coming out of the time that I came out of being in my 20s.
Yeah.
To running into this,
Right.
and it was just like, I do not understand this. But it was, I imagine it to be a response to like this highly produced cultural experience of like a Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, everything overly produced, to like, nah, this is just me, and it's raw, and it's not that.
Yeah.
And so to be not that is to be a little pudgy and
pop music in the 90s turning into grunge. I mean, these are all, that's, you could see it happening. And I again, back to what we were talking about earlier, I think we're going to see more sophistication in these media forms that are now a little hard to take, more than a little hard to take. Yeah.
With as much experience as you've had in media, I mean, where's your idea of, I mean, did you predict in any way, shape, or form the internet and what it would do to media consumption, and where do you see it going?
I didn't predict that. We actually had in a bad time in the market, we had a CD-ROM company. There was an offshoot of our company because I firmly believed that people want to hold on to their whatever, their music or whatever it is. And no, I didn't predict that. And there's a degree to which I still find it's all happening so fast.
Yeah.
It's just happening so fast. And it's what I'm mostly doing these days is trying to sort of manage the amount of time I look at social media and think about social media so that I have time to create. I want to, and that's, it's fundamentally important to me to be doing that because we have a lot of distractions, especially when you are, an organization like Illustration Institute where we want to be reaching young, old, various, a very broad range of audience. And so we find ourselves it can become certainly overwhelming what's happening in social media. The way that we deal with that is, we have an assistant whose life, she's incredibly thoughtful about Instagram and how we use Instagram. And I allow myself to be sort of ignorant around her, and sort of say, and admit to my mistakes and admit to what we're working through. But again, we have an ongoing dialogue where, I'm taking what Kate says very seriously because that's her realm. It's a place that she cares about that form of social media. And through her, I'm able to sort of cherry pick what part of it I want to engage in. But yeah.
What part of that do you enjoy engaging in?
Currently I really enjoy the way that her name is Kate, sort of thinks about the aesthetics of the feed. Mm-hmm. And thinks about, how we're messaging things. I do enjoy that. I find the aesthetic of our feed to be, this is very superficial, I guess, but I like the way it looks. I also enjoy the fact that we are engaging more with a community of narrative artists, which include illustrators, comic book artists, animators from really all over the world. And it's based, what we're able to do is create, or I guess exploit, I guess in some way, the romance that's connected with islands off the coast of Maine. I mean, we have a residency out there that is outstanding. I mean, it's amazing. It was built in the first building was built in 1919. And so what we're able to do is connect with a community that is vast on social media, especially Instagram, which is, that is the social media, at least the current social media for, creative artists and narrative artists for sure.
Right.
So I love the relationships that we're building and the connections that we're making. Those are substantive connections. I used to find a great deal of comfort in my Rolodex, a Rolodex, because I would actually, when I had downtime, I would spin through the Rolodex and say, oh, I haven't talked to Fred Seibert in a while, or I haven't talked to this person in a while. And I would reach out to them. I'm trying to have sort of a Rolodex sort of relationship with social media as well, and try to think of it for its positive aspects as opposed to the fact that it's distracting and all of the things that we complain about with social media. So I'm trying to use it as a way of connecting with our cohort, that is our community, which is not here in Maine.
With wanting to build the creative economy in Maine and the ability to work remotely, how do those in some way come in conflict with the vision that you might have of growing the creative economy in Maine?
This has been going on for quite some time. All of the production companies that I've worked with have been decentralized, and the ones that failed first back in the 90s, the ones in New York were the ones that had huge edit suites and, production sound rooms and such. And so a lot of what we're doing is decentralized. I mean, we're going to be working with people all around the world. And it's hard to, you work with companies too that have one foot in Maine and one foot in like Utah. We just did a video production with a company called Dangerfield and Hawks, where the creative director is here in Maine and his business partner is off in Utah. And so I'm seeing this as being more the norm and inevitable. The way that we sort of connect things to Maine is, by the way, I was just referring to, is to say, this is a great place. This is a place where some portion of your creative endeavor can happen. People do want to live here. And so you can you tell the story, basically. It's not even, I was going to say you create a mystique, but you're telling the story. You're telling it in an honest way. And thing that's funny about Maine, another thing that I love about this state is that I call it sort of the land of hidden treasures. We've got a lot of creative people here. And I love the fact that we have, we have a bounty of creative people. The part that bothers me is the part that is that there are hidden treasures. That it's hard to find each other sometimes, or it isn't as easy as it could be to find creative collaborators. And there's a number of reasons for that. I think part of it is the residual sort of droll Yankee sort of thing. You don't want to boast too much about what we're doing,
right?
But also I think we just need to find ways to find forums to make sure that people know about the creative talent that resides here. I mean, we lease space to Activision. Activision has an office here in Maine, which is extraordinary, but virtually nobody knows about it. So it's here.
The embodied conflict and the the embodied conflict within a creative, it seems like if the more creative someone tends to be, the less likely it is they're going to be successful at being able to turn that into a living, unless they go down a path where that is managed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's embodied. Like, if you're open to all the possibilities, it's very difficult to narrow yourself down and focus on making a business work as a sole proprietor. Or like, how do we solve that in some way? Or how do we help creatives actually realize, like, oh, I'm creative, I'm probably not going to be that great at setting goals, sticking to them, getting up early, doing it, not, all these things that are so difficult to achieve a level of success of being able to support yourself and a family off of being creative.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of answers to that, I think. One is, generally, lack of discipline is one issue entirely. You need to have some sort of commitment and discipline.
Right, but you also have to have some lack of discipline.
You do. But you need both. You do need both. I mean, you need to practice and play, right? You have to do both. I was lamenting in my time at art schools, and I've taught at universities and art schools, is that I was lamenting the fact that there seems to be diminishing amount of what we would call alpha artists, artists that are out there willing to talk positively and openly about the work that they do. And I'm not saying everybody should be an alpha artist. That's probably not the exact right term. Let's say extrovert then,
But see, every artist I've run into, I'm able to, like, if they're accomplished, like if they've developed what they're doing, they're very able to articulate the philosophy and the deeper push behind what they do.
Yeah, because there's a bubble here. The two of us are talking about these issues because we care deeply about these issues, right. And we could talk for hours about this. What I'm talking about is what I was referring to earlier, which is when you're is finding ways to speak to the larger community, and talk and to the investment community, and talk to people that are able to help us maybe solve the problems of affordable housing for artists, that sort of thing. That's where I think that's where I see the role of an extroverted artist. And there's no,
right.
So we tend to be, I've seen a trend towards we're sort of more circumspect and thoughtful, and but getting out there and talking about things, I think, is also fundamentally important.
Just mentioning extrovert there, it also reminded me, I was listening to a podcast the other day where I believe it was a psychologist talking to someone about attention span, and how your attention span is essentially, imagine a marker board, and you're drawing on that marker board with disappearing ink.
Right.
So there's a certain amount of time you get to, before it goes away.
Right.
And to me, I turned that on myself. I'm extremely introverted, excel in conversations like this, but I'm not going to be in a group kind of like, hey, everybody, let's talk about small things. And that's kind of insulting to say it that way. Sorry. But the extrovert is standing at their marker board with the disappearing ink, writing down everything they see going on around them and the things that other people are saying. And they're taking it in, they're translating it and putting it back out, and they're exchanging on that marker board constantly. An introvert has an internal conversation that they're working through on that marker board constantly. That's what I've got going on constantly, is just wheels grinding, and it's disappearing on this end, and I got to get back there and then when I have to talk to like a bunch of people that do not apply information to my marker board that I'm working on that marker board, I have to stop the whole flow of that. Yeah. And it doesn't stop, it just gets blocked. Yeah. So it builds up. Right. And by the end of me trying to put other people's marks that I don't care about on my marker board, that don't apply to the things that are backing up behind the dam. At the end of that, party or social event or whatever else, there's just this huge backlog of you've got to go and you've got to spend time by yourself and break the dam and work it all out on that marker board to where you come back to a level of competency and peace with yourself again.
Yeah.
It was a weird realization for me of kind of.
But are you talking about how we talk about our work in this case? Is that what you're talking about?
Everything.
Yeah.
Like as an introvert, I'm constantly,
yeah.
There's always something I'm hyper focused on grinding through, thinking about.
Yeah.
And to go to a event or anything else, it's like all I want to do is be working out these problems that I'm working through with my internal conversation. And it's all happening in disappearing ink.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden someone wants to put like the weather on that marker board.
Yeah.
It's.
Well, I mean, in conversations about talking about your work, like the work that you do or the work that I do is like level 2 or 3 in conversation. That's the most difficult stuff oftentimes to articulate. What I'm actually talking about is more fundamental, is that I genuinely want to invite people in. I want to invite people in to be part of the creative process. I want to introduce them to the great illustrators and narrative artists that we're bringing here. And I want to do it in a way that is non-threatening and not full of jargon, actually. That's the other thing that's really interesting about narrative artists, is that as opposed to, say, gallery artists, is that they're talking about story. They love story. So that becomes an instant connection, or often becomes a connection between, a cohort that's outside of the creative realm. They might be outside of that in some degree. So I think, I'm sort of talking about basic things. Inviting the world in is what I'm talking about. Not necessarily getting into and then, somewhere down the road, you start to talk about the nuance of how things are made. A few years ago, we had Bob Mankoff. We invited Bob Mankoff, who is the cartoon editor of The New Yorker, to premiere to do an introduction for a premiere of a movie documentary that he created about how to create New Yorker cartoons. And I called him. I was nervous as can be. He's one of the most powerful people in, cartooning. I mean, but that's a real thing. I mean, it's like a big deal.
That's a funny, I don't know that I've ever heard a sentence like that. He's a powerful person in cartooning.
It's all, it's true though. I mean, he's a powerful person within the idea, within culture, basically. Yeah. And I said, would you be willing to come up? We'd pay you to come up to do a little talk about your movie. And he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I'll come up for free on the condition that I'd like to teach a workshop, and I want to bring a New Yorker cartoonist with me. And I said, and I was like, who's going to say no to that? I said, that's great. That's very generous of you.
Yeah, I never would have called and asked you to do that.
I wouldn't have asked you to do that, but he offered this up.
Like, all right.
And so he came up and gave a workshop to students and alumni at Maine College of Art. And actually, I felt like I was watching a master class. It was amazing. He first talked about the legacy of New Yorker cartoons, talked about their importance, and also was very candid about how their audience is winnowing a bit. They're aging out, in some ways, and they're looking for new talent and such. And then Emily got up and broke down it was demystified the whole process of creating a New Yorker cartoon. I mean, she did these brilliant things where she had students fold up a piece of paper into quadrants, and then she gave them an idiom like house on fire or something like that. And she said, in the first quadrant, I'd like you to draw that idea in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And in the next one, I want you to do it in 5 minutes. And the third, I'd like you to do it in 30 seconds. And the last, I'd like you to do it in 10 seconds. And she then had them sort of look at this and say, which of this conveys your interpretation of this idiom? And for some people, it was the 10-minute drawing. For others, it was the 10-second drawing. After this, and then she went into sort of how to write a cartoon as well. Afterwards, the students I was blown away with what they presented, and the students were as well. And Bob Mankoff came up to me and sort of nudged me, and he said, "Hey, 2 of your alumni just came up and said this was the best learning experience they've ever had in their entire artistic career, including their time at Maine College of Art." And my nose got out of joint for a little bit. It was like out of joint for a couple of seconds. But then I was like, no, this is brilliant. This is what complements what we do in a curriculum-based sort of program. Mm-hmm. Like giving students this experience, they're going to remember that forever. They're going to forget much of what we taught them in the classroom. But this 2-hour workshop, hour and a half workshop, worked because it was accessible, it was respectful, and I should also mention, virtually none of these students there was no relevance in their life. The New Yorker had no relevance in their lives. They just didn't know about the New Yorker, and they came away, I think significantly changed because of that. Their willingness, Bob's willingness to say, as an alpha artist, well, I'll tell you what, I'll do better. I'll come up, drive up in my Tesla, and we'll do a workshop with your students. And that isn't telling everything, but it's certainly creating or offering a gift that a bunch of those students and myself will build on over the years.
Right.
Yeah. It wasn't even that it wasn't that alpha or that extroverted. It was just it was generous, basically.
For him, why do you think he wanted to do that? Why do you think he asked for that?
Well, in his own words, he said, we need to start fishing outside of our gene pool, which was great.
What did he mean by that?
New Yorkers. All of the New Yorker artists are New Yorkers. They're generally, and they've been, that's their tradition. So what does it mean to look for talent in the Midwest?
So he was recruiting in a way?
He was doing the good work. Yeah. I don't know, he wasn't overtly recruiting, but he was saying, you could do this.
Right.
And what they did in that workshop was suggest to a number of us that you could do that. You can make New Yorker cartoons.
Yeah. There's something about the success I've had to be able to support my family off of simply taking pictures.
Yeah.
Not simple, but there's something to my success that is I can say came from me not being from Maine.
Right.
I see Maine as someone who's experiencing it for the first time, like a child.
Right.
When I started my photographic career of looking at architecture, which I knew about, but in this place that was new to me. I saw the amazing that everyone else had experienced millions of times, and it just wasn't as amazing to them. And to be able to capture it with that newness and that passion gives you that edge. And it's weird how that dwindles.
Yeah.
And I've said this on this podcast
before. What dwindles?
So my wife and I designed and built a house about 4 years ago. I mentioned this way too much in this podcast, but who cares?
Yeah.
Who's listening anyways, right? It's informal. And when you come in the front door, it's just a big open space, essentially concrete floors, floor to ceiling windows on part of the front wall turning the side. And the view outside is across grass and then a nice little rock wall and forest. And it's a real kind of like, ooh, when you come in, it's like, wow, look at that. It's not normal for a house to. And when you first come in, it's like that. The second time you come in, it's still like that. But by the 2000th time you come in, you just throw your bag on the ground and do your thing. Right. Our kitchen cabinets are IKEA cabinets. and they're glossy white. And at the right time of the day, you can stand in the kitchen and look at the cabinets and you'll see a reflection of what's behind you.
Yeah.
When I saw that reflection for the first time after losing my first experience with coming into the house, I saw the house, but in a mirrored fashion.
Right.
And I was like, whoa. And I turned around to look at it like I had, and I didn't feel anything. I turned back and I looked at the cabinets and I felt it.
Yeah.
What the hell is that about?
Yeah. Yeah. You're bringing up another aspect of what I really cherish with having artists coming to the Institute, is that every time they come, they're seeing Maine with fresh eyes,
right?
And they're seeing the Institute, the buildings that we have there, everything about what we're, what Portland and the coast of Maine initially attracted us is very new and fresh to them, and you can't help but get caught up in that as well. So
you can observe it, and you can always go to new places in Maine until you've been to all of them a bunch. But and there's also a psychological aspect to it, that when people have a spiritual experience, the experience will not hold as much power on them after they articulate it and share it time and time again. The ability to hold it emotionally leaves you the more you articulate it. But that is also the same with a traumatic experience. The more you articulate it, the less it has emotional hold on you. And our whole life is this thing of this comes back to me, this thing of love and truth. The truth is the part of articulating and thinking out what happened to me. What happened to me was that relational thing, that nature of love being relational. Be it a bad experience or a good experience, it's still a relational experience. And as you take it from that, it will be emotional to you. But as you translate it through you into articulated word representing truth in a way, the emotional part dies, and the articulation.
The love part dies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not dying, but it's not held within you only in that thing anymore. Yeah. And that's interesting. Like relationships over time can either deepen, as I've experienced with my own wife through losing my faith and her maintaining her faith, has produced huge amounts of conflict, but we've become new people that our relationship is deepened through that. And it's only gone through almost losing that that it deepens. Midlife crisis is a real and valuable thing if you can get through it.
Right.
There's hope.
Yeah. I live with my wife is an optimist for sure. And she can't get enough of the wonder of the place.
Really?
And I mean, like, she's constantly taking pictures of sunsets and plants and everything. And she's a constant reminder that's why we moved here. And and she's starting to sort of see things in detail that I don't normally see. I sort of see the big picture, but she's looking at details a lot. And so I think that some of the answer for maintaining your love for a place is built around those sort of relationships as well.
Showing it, like I've experienced what you're saying through showing all these places that I've come to love and to be able to feel. I've revisited them now through my children, taking them there, showing them that.
Right.
That's interesting. Well, we could go on forever. I don't want to take your entire day.
This was great. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate it. After we cut here, I want to talk to you about your intern and how I might find one like that. Not an intern, but an employee that knows about Instagram and all that. Don't let me forget.
Okay.
But
I won't.
Thank you for coming down to
my pleasure.
What I call New Portland.
I like New Portland.
It's a nice place.
It's been a while since I've been down here. We got sort of tripped up by this pandemic thing, and I just haven't been out as much, but it's good to be back. So
well, we come out to Peaks Island all the time in the summer.
Well, next time you're out, let me know and we'll give you the grand tour.
We come and we'll dock there. We'll go and grab some food at the grocery store, get back on the boat, and then usually go out to Cliff.
Yeah.
No, not Cliff. Jewel.
Yeah.
And we go out and look at the ruins and stuff, and the kids love that. It's so
great.
much fun. But hey,
Well, thank
thanks
you
for
very
coming
much.
down.
Thank you.
And lovely conversation.
Thanks for having me. Likewise.
Yeah.